Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Hellboy? Stick around and find out. Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Here is my uncut review of Hellboy, or the rebooted Hellboy. I enjoyed the Guillermo del Toro movies with Ron Perlman, and really would have liked to have seen a third installment in that to kind of make it a nice rounded trilogy, although the second one did end in a place where I felt like we could let go of these characters. They kind of have been given their happy ending if we want to just, see it as that. So a third one might have actually been weird and, jumped the shark. I don't know. We'll never know, I suppose. Instead, we got this reboot of Hellboy. The synopsis on IMDb reads, based on the graphic novels by Mike Mignola, Hellboy, caught between the worlds of the supernatural and human, battles an ancient sorceress bent on revenge. And that's a pretty good synopsis. I mean, it's not a complicated plot. It's a supernatural superhero movie that leans heavily into horror elements, I think especially in the second half. But, right from the beginning, people are dying horribly. There's lots of blood and gore. It's balanced a bit by frequent humor, much of which comes from the jaded perspective of Hellboy, which is, I normally don't like humor in movies, and I don't like, wisecracking smart aleck type of humor. But I can get into like a jaded, just like fed up with life kind of humor, and that's a lot of what the vibe of the humor is for a good amount of this movie. There is some somewhat silly humor involved. There's an anthropomorphic, low-intelligence, bumbling henchman that I merely tolerated in this movie. I hate that kind of character trope. I don't find it funny or silly or whatever, But the movie made up for it in the second half. They were only kind of leaning on him and his humor for a few scenes in the first half, and then in the back half it leans, I think, more heavily into horror, legitimately scaring or disturbing me in several scenes, which I really appreciated because you don't often see horror just kind of mixed in with other genres like comedy or superhero movies and stuff like that. So that was a nice, when it comes to Hellboy, whether it's the Guillermo del Toro movies or this one, you're getting a different package than your typical comic booky superhero type of movie. It's mostly, I would describe it as plot oriented, or maybe situation oriented would be a better way to describe it. There's a sequence of fantastical situations that Hellboy has to navigate that almost episodic in a sense, that are loosely held together by the overall plot to stop the big bad sorceress from ending the world. And this structure made the first half a little bit slow for me, because I like to have an overarching kind of story and tension and stakes that are rising consistently throughout. Because of that first half, I didn't feel the tension rising toward any climax of any kind for a while. But in the second half, the stakes became more, I guess, present to me, more clear to me, and more involved in the action that was happening in the moment. And the horror elements became stronger. And so on a story level, I was really won over the longer I watched the movie. I was thinking during the first half, I was like, I'm not feeling connected. This is probably a movie that I'm just gonna sit through. But at some point in the middle, I really started to kind of get engaged with it, and so that was nice to see that shift happen in my experience. It even has a nice father-son moment that gave me some feelings, and I always appreciate that. I'm a sucker for good father-son moments. Let's talk about the cast a little bit. There are a couple character arcs, but I wouldn't call it character-driven, and so while I thought all the performances were fine, they did what I needed them to do, particularly, and when I'm watching a movie, they didn't have, much complexity to work with in the script, So if these actors all had a lot more potential and ability as actors, this wasn't the script that was really going to showcase that. That said, I have to compliment David Harbour, who plays Hellboy. You've probably seen him in some other movies. He's never been like a leading man to my knowledge. He usually plays kind of like the jerk or sometimes the villain, and he plays Hellboy in this, and I really enjoyed his performance. I was thinking to myself, Ron Perlman's going to be a hard act to follow, because I really liked what he did with the character in those two movies. And David Harbour's version of him is different, but it still feels like Hellboy. I don't know how to describe it any other way. And that's just based on my experience watching the first movie. I don't have any experience reading the comics, although I have to say, after watching this movie, I'm like, gosh, I wonder if I could find a cheap trade paperback. I might be interested in this world. I might be interested in this character. If some of these same things that they are doing in this movie and in the previous two Hellboy movies, if that's kind of a mainstay of what the books are about, then I might be interested. Anyway, performing under all that makeup is a challenge. I've never done it before, but I just know from watching behind-the-scenes features of various movies where they have masks on the characters, and it's tough to show subtlety and subtle emotional subtext, and you really have to adopt a different style of acting, and some actors aren't able to make that adjustment, and it results in a performance that you're not connected to. But between the close-ups and his own performing abilities, I never felt like the loads of prosthetics and makeup created a barrier between me and Hellboy's feelings. Now, I do think that it helps that the Hellboy character has this kind of stoic and gruff exterior attitude by default, but I really do think that David Harbour was suited to this role and what it required of him. Okay, so let's talk about the visuals and stuff. During the first half, I definitely missed the visual style of Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy movies. They had that steampunk clockwork vibe that was just great for my particular tastes. And for a bit of this movie, I just felt like it had the trappings of horror without actually horrifying me. It's just like, oh, yep, there's blood, there's gore, but it wasn't having, I think, the effect that I wanted it to have on me. But as I said earlier, in the second half, I felt like they started, more naturally combining the visual designs, the horror designs for different characters, with character behaviors in some unsettling ways, such as when an undead witch kind of clambers around the room, in that upside-down crab walk style that we've seen in some horror movies before, but it's still really weird and creepy looking. Or when two minor characters are killed by having their bodies mystically twisted around in just nasty ways and broken, pulling their limbs in bad directions and getting all grotesque in their death throes, So for me, it took about half of the movie, but it did seem to settle into its own visual style and visual feel. It didn't help, I would say, that the CGI looked a little to my eye, to be on the undercooked side. Now, I do have an eye, as many of you know, that just seems cursed to pick out CGI, even when they're really at the top of their game and trying to make it look realistic. But I do think that the CG looked a little bit below the bar of current standards. Not much, but enough that I was just like, this feels a little animated, or the textures just feels just a little bit cartoony or something. Something didn't quite make it feel settled in the world like I wanted it to. Which is why I'm all the more glad that they used makeup effects as much as they did. Not near as often as I'd like, but at least it wasn't all CGI, and I'm grateful for that. I'll just briefly comment on the music. They have kind of a rock, heavy metal type of soundtrack, and I think that's probably because in the vibe I was getting from Hellboy, and I think they were trying to play up the association that at least, older rock, or maybe current rock and current metal, does too. But, there's that association of the trappings, at least, of the occult with some forms of rock and heavy metal. And so I think they were trying to kind of play that up in both Hellboy's character as being kind of like this, you almost get kind of like a gruff biker rocker vibe off of him. And the score was definitely playing that up as well at certain points. And so I thought that was a nice kind of union of those two things. Okay, so what about themes? Is there anything of worthwhile moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the story and the embedded themes that might lead to some worthwhile thought or conversation? Well, first, I gotta get one mild irritation out of the way. I'll try not to spend too much time on it, but the movie takes place in what is supposed to be our world, apart from all the supernatural elements, and it leans on the trappings of real world occult practices, so there are pentagrams and there are, goat type, evil goat type creatures, or, what seems to be the leftovers of a sacrifice or something, just like, weird, nasty, occult type aesthetics, but it often has the protagonists also taking advantage of things that look like real-world occult practices, like seances and the use of mediums and stuff like that, which implicitly, when you have the protagonists do that, unless you're telling a more complex, a morally complex story, which I don't think they are as morally complex as I wish they were. But, it implicitly validates them when you have your heroes using the occult, The movie also briefly and vaguely validates some form of Christian belief, I should say. In one scene, an evil creature needs to get access to this mystically sealed box, and he says that it can only be opened by, I think he said, like the words of a man of God. But God himself seems uninvolved in the story. And even these Christian aesthetic trappings are treated ultimately as no more than these sort of magic rituals. That guy found a workaround, that really just made it seem like, oh, you really just, I don't want to spoil the scene, but his workaround really reduced the idea of needing the words of a man of God to just like this, this ritual, like a loophole, that God really, what did God have to do with that at all? So much in the same way like the Bible, I think, is treated almost like a spell book in most exorcism movies, when the guy gets out and he's just like, blah, 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 and you just wonder, are you even thinking about what you're saying? Or he's saying it in Latin or, whatever. And it just seems like it's more of, they're just repeating the same line over and over again, like it's a spell book or an incantation or something like that, as opposed to really depending on and having faith in the truth of who God is and his presence and his desire to protect us from evil, So that's a bit of a shortcoming for me. I think in stories of good versus evil, it's really valuable to have strong and pure representations of both good and evil, so that we know what the good guys are fighting for and what we as an audience are hoping the heroes can avoid or defeat. What would it mean for quote-unquote evil to run loose, Now, setting that aside, I think this movie has some great potential springboards for conversation and self-examination, for us as Christians in particular. Hellboy lives in constant tension because of his competing identities. He is a demon or a monster of some kind, but he was raised by a human. Not only that, he was raised to hunt down and exterminate creatures that are arguably his sort of siblings in a sense. There is some complexity in that because many of them deserve extermination, but he also wonders out loud whether or not monsters would stop hurting humans if humans stopped hurting monsters. And I think this is maybe calling up this idea of there's just lots of polarization, especially in dialogue on the internet. There's just a lot of polarization that people are like gravitating toward, these different camps, and there's not gentleness of tone and calmness of attitude and nuance in the issues that we find ourselves divided over, and so this movie may or may not be making a comment just on that kind of culture that we are generating right now online. And this tension of this character, of Hellboy's character, and that potential theme there is enhanced by the character arc of a supporting cast member who has this strong bias against monsters and against Hellboy himself. And he's cautioned by another that, hey, hate sometimes wears the most righteous of faces. And this struck me as potential messaging from the writer, who maybe feels like those in the world who claim to be righteous, maybe he would even particularly have Christians in mind, are actually filled with hate. Now, of course, we can't know each other's hearts, and that might be true or false on a case-by-case basis with any Christian or any person, that is in some way associating themselves with righteousness. But I think it's really worthwhile for us as Christians to examine our hearts when we feel a responsibility to speak up against some form of evil that we see. We should ask, are my words in this moment motivated by love for God and for the truth of his character to be seen? Or is it motivated by love for people and my desire that they not fall victim to evils in the world that maybe that they are embracing without realizing their self-destructive, pattern in that? Or is what I have going on inside me a sort of a self-righteous anger, or fear of some kind that's fueling what I want to say on this given issue? And this applies, I think, to both our internet conversations and also, just in our regular day-to-day real-world relationships. That it's really worth examining our hearts and like, okay, I know that this thing that I see is wrong, and I know that it should be confronted. Is there anything else in the mix that is not of God that might be fueling my desire to confront this? I think that's a really important exercise for us to go through and to ask ourselves, am I motivated by love in this? And if not, then what is going on inside of me that is causing something else other than love to be my motivation? How can I develop compassion and love for this person? I think that we would really do well to explore our hearts in that. As we are aiming to oppose evil and represent truth to those that we interact with, it's vital that we remember there's still evil inside of us as well. We are new creations in Christ as believers who've placed our faith in Him for our rescue from all of our sinful tendencies and patterns, but that rescue is not complete yet. It's a work in progress that will be complete in eternity, but in this life we're never going to see that work complete. And so there's this remnant of evil that still clings to us that we have to humbly acknowledge and intentionally resist. 1 John 1:8 says, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. And 1 Corinthians 13:1-3, I think this is really good to remember, if we're thinking to ourselves, boy, God wants me to confront this kind of evil that I see happening right now. He wants me to confront this. He wants me to be used, and I think God could maybe use me in a really powerful way here. I think that's what this situation seems to be allowing for right now. So we could really think that we are in line with what God is doing. But listen to these words. 1 Corinthians 13:1-3 says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and to understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, if I'm that committed, but have not love, I gain nothing. So thematically, just in summary, Hellboy is a mixed bag for me, definitely, but if somewhere in there is the message that we should fight evil, but love people, I think that's a message definitely worth hearing. Now, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, skip this one. You're going to enjoy it, but you're going to pay half the Blu-ray price just to see it once, and it's not going to be enjoyable right from the get-go the first time you watch it. That said, you're going to watch it ultimately at least twice. Don't give up during that first half. You'll warm up to it the more you watch, and even the first half will look a little better in retrospect after getting into that second half. And for a guy that loves weird-looking and gory monsters, this one has you covered. It's rated R for strong, bloody violence and gore throughout, and language. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, anything you want to do to help get this content out there to those that might be interested in it. I would really appreciate that. And then, of course, as always, I hope you join us over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. We've got a ton going on here at Spirit Blade Productions and Christian Geek Central, including our in-depth Bible study for geeks, movie, game, and other entertainment reviews or commentary, live streams, Christian geek news, original audio dramas, and tons more. And on top of all that, you can become a Spirit Blade insider with an influential voice and get access to exclusive content and rewards. It's your involvement as a patron that will keep all of this going and growing, so I want to thank you for your consideration in that. For more information, please check out our Patreon page through the link below at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Thanks for listening.